I feel like I'm screaming over the fans.
I know.
It's hot.
Maybe we should address that in the beginning of the videos.
Maybe.
But
Oh well. Who cares? The 4 people who watch our videos can just
they can deal.
complain at
There we go.
us.
We'll see you in the comments.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Book Brood.
This is part 2 of April Wrap-Up 2019. We hope you can hear we hope you can hear us over our fans
We can't hear you.
and our slurring words. So the next thing I read in April,
Yes.
to jump right in, is Rosario plus Vampire Volume 13. This is continuing the story of the human at the monster school, and he's followed around by Rosario, who is the vampire, who's the strongest of the monsters there, and that's pretty much the only reason he's getting by day to day is because he has the strongest kid
She's-
on campus
she's taking care of
protecting
him.
his secret. Yeah, pretty recycled story, kind of monster of the week sort of thing, but that's there's about 5 of those within each manga volume, so it's continuing to go along. I'll probably continue to pick up these volumes because the library has like 20 of them or something.
Talking about Monster of the Week,
Uh-huh.
I have been slowly making my way through the series of Unfortunate Events for the first time and loving it. This month I read book number 3, The Wide Window by Lemony Snicket, and I started the 4th one and got sidetracked, but I'm really enjoying these, but they are slightly formulaic, but the same group of children moving from town to town, trying to get away from Count Olaf, and he finds them
Always.
always. But it is enjoyable. I'm liking it.
All right. The next thing I read in April, probably the most intense thing I read all month, was The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is number 2 in the Hyperion Cantos. This begins right where Hyperion left off, where the pilgrims are on their way to the Time Tombs to confront the Shrike. However, things don't go as they plan. They pretty much spent the whole book expecting to die pretty much as soon as they set foot on Hyperion, and they end up going to where the Shrike's supposedly home is, the Time Tombs, and they end up like camping out there and almost running out of food before stuff starts happening.
Oh, wow.
So they're all kind of disoriented and like, well, what are we waiting for? But then stuff starts popping off, and this, I feel like, was an exercise in Dan Simmons trying to write a Deus Ex Machina story, but not have it seem otherworldly, or that it took the supernatural to solve the problem. So
Nice.
this has a lot to do with the future and the past communicating with one another through various means. AI societies, how they interact with humans, and where Hyperion, this weird planet, and this weird being called the Shrike fit in, and all of that. It was an incredible web of ideas and just plot spun together, and it took me a long time to get to the Hyperion novels by Dan Simmons, but I do truly understand now why that is considered such a pillar of the sci-fi genre. Yeah.
Awesome. Did you have to make it halfway through before it all started making sense?
Well,
Like Neil Stephenson?
not so much. The first book kind of dips your toe in a bit to the world.
Okay.
Because it's these pilgrims telling their stories. So through their stories, you get their history, but plus you get the exposition to the world itself. So
Okay.
by the time that you've reached Fall of Hyperion, you know all about the technology, how the world works, how everyone's interacting with each other, because it progressed so naturally with each of those characters' stories in the first one.
Okay.
So like Hyperion is kind of a setup story, but it's still very good, and it's still it's necessary for the final product of the of at least Fall of Hyperion. There's 2 more that I haven't gotten to. My best friend says they're pretty good.
The next one I want to talk about was probably my favorite read, or up there in the top 3 favorite reads of the month, and that was Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames. And this book was awesome. I loved it. This was definitely a story of the author having fun with his world and having fun with his characters, and there were little nods to like certain tropes, and there was one point where he could have done like an info dump, but instead he had the main character remember, oh yeah, every time we pass this thing, this other character tells me this story, and this is the story. And then as they pass it, that character's like, hey, did I ever tell you this story? And he's like, yes, you've told me 100 times, you know? So, like, just having fun with those things. This is a story about retired mercenaries having to get back in the game to go rescue one of the members' daughters. And they are grumpy old men who are out of shape and not in fighting shape, but they used to be like the best mercenary band out there, right? So they are legends. And this world is so well crafted. It's so dangerous and big, and there are monsters everywhere. And so these characters know exactly what's out there and how dangerous it is, and how likely it is that they're gonna die. But they're going along anyways because they just have to. And the main character is such a grumpy old man. It's delightful. And then there's all these references about, like, I don't even know how to say it, but like their mercenary band is set up like a rock star band, right? And there's the different
analogy for
so each character, you can very clearly see what instrument they would play, like what part of the band they would be. Like they have a booker who promotes the band and then gets them gigs to go fight off monsters, you know, and it was absolutely delightful and I loved it.
All right, the next thing I read in April was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. This is a story about Stella, who is a econometrician, but she's very wealthy and she has Asperger's, and she's trying to find a husband because her parents mentioned that they wanted grandchildren, and so she's just in her logical thinking is like, well, I need to have a husband, but I don't really know how to do relationships. So she decides to hire a male escort to teach her how to have sex properly and how to relationship. And so Michael, the escort, is first very baffled by why a young woman is actually hiring his services, but then eventually realizes kind of what's going on. And it's a very, very cute story of them actually falling in love. And steamy. Oh, man.
Yeah?
Oh, man. I was mentioning that the cover of this book, the color schemes of it reminded me of Fangirl, just the
right.
tones and everything of it. Totally different steaminess factors on it.
Yeah, Fangirl was not very steamy at all.
Not at all.
No.
This one, who did, I heard about this book from another booktuber. I cannot,
can't log into our account.
I can't log into our account from this computer right here. So that's perfect. Anyway, I will link them below. But she was mentioning how the steaminess of this as well would catch her off guard. She said she'd be driving in her car and like get embarrassed just because, you know, like just seeing other people around while hearing these things. Like, oh, people know what I'm listening to. So yeah, so that was The Kiss Quotient. One I definitely recommend for romance fans.
I read a graphic novel called Book Club by Bill Barnes, and this was a very quick, easy, amusing read about librarians and the interesting characters they run into on a daily basis, and how you have to have a sense of humor when dealing with these things, and how just ridiculous some people can be in their requests and stuff, and what people use the library for when clearly it's not reading. I enjoyed it. I think this was the 4th volume, but it didn't matter. They were very easy to get into.
Cool. The next thing I read in April was The Stars Change by Marianne Morhanari, I think. This was interesting. It was a story about a planet that pretty much had a university that was open to all species of alien races. And it had an interesting story format where it would go from one character who would then meet or be passed by someone else, and then it would switch to them, and it would continue to kind of go around to different people in the town, different
You told me about that.
characters. It was interesting, and it obviously took some forethought and some planning to put into this. The story was really anticlimactic, though, and not very satisfying at the end of it. It was had to do with like stopping a terrorist plot that just and ended up being too easy for the characters at the end, and which it wasn't about. It was about the characters, not the terrorist attack, but it seemed like more that the author had come up with a lot of really interesting ideas for different alien species and the cultures that they would come from, things like that, and wanted to relay those, but needed some kind of a framework of a plot to illustrate them. Because one of the weirdest things was this character that had nothing to do with the plot in general, that just went and commits suicide because that's part of its its life cycle. And it's like, well, what was that even there for? Like, that added nothing to this.
Man.
It was just to illustrate another species, essentially.
Clearly an idea that she had in her mind.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah. So, it got me my my astronomy owl.
I think the rest of the ones that I'm going to talk about are all nonfiction. I hit a serious mindset where I went totally manic and got really into physics and astrophysics and stuff. The two that were different were, I read Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging by Sebastian. I'm not sure if it's Junger or Junger. I've heard both, but Junger sounds right. This was a reread for me, and I absolutely love it, and I highly recommend it to you. This is a story about just human psychology, what happens in life or death situations, and the different personalities that are brought out in these life or death situations. And the community and the bonding that can happen between people in situations like this, and how these are like terrible, terrible situations, like in the middle of a war zone, or a natural disaster, and these can be life or death like times, but people looking back on it will often say it was the greatest time of their, not the great, like the best time of their life, because of how they felt needed and how close they felt with the other people around them and how connected everyone was. And even though like they were starving or terrified they were going to get killed or things like that, even though that was going on, they felt so connected to other human beings that was one of the greatest times of their life. And it was absolutely fascinating book. It was really well done. I liked it.
It's nice to have a nonfiction you can reread. That's cool.
Yeah, I cried the first time I read it, and I teared up a little bit the second time, but I managed to, I was at work, so I managed to choke it down. It was just very emotional, the stories of these people.
Yeah. Okay, the next thing I read in April was The Proposal by Jasmine Guillory. This is the sequel follow-up to The Wedding Date. This follows Carlos, and that is Drew's best friend. So Drew was the main character from The Wedding Date. And this is his adventure in love, and it starts out with Nick, who is his love interest, being proposed to on the big screen at a baseball game to a guy that she's casually seeing. And so big embarrassing moment of, saying no in front of the Jumbotron. Everything. So they meet that way. He finds a way to tactfully sneak her out of the stadium away from the press and everything. It's, trying to swarm her and stuff. And it was fine. I wouldn't say lightning struck twice, but it was a fine enough follow-up. So, yeah.
For half a second, I thought that you were reading a male-male romance there. You said Nick.
Right, yeah. It was a little confusing in the first few pages because you found that copy at the library, and so I had started reading it physically and was sort of... yeah.
Was it dual narrated in the audio?
No, it was just a female narrator. Yeah.
The other standout non-physics related book that I read was Free Will by Sam Harris, and I love Sam Harris. A lot of people think he's a total asshole, which he is, but he's so unapologetic in his worldview. This is a very short book about just the illusion of free will and how everyone is making the only choice that they can every moment of every day, and we're so programmed from every experience and our surroundings, and we think that we're choosing things, but really we're not. And how they've given participants in tests, like the little, they've tested their brain and they've watched it and they've given them simple choices, and there's a multiple second delay between when their brain makes the choice and when they think they choose the choice. And how it was basically a giant call for empathy for people who don't agree with you. Basically, like, everyone's just making the only choice that they can, and the only way to change your choice is to change your circumstance or change your knowledge. And I don't know, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really good.
That is really fascinating, just the way the brain works. Yeah. All right, the next thing I read in April was Roomies by Christina Lauren. This one I did for Owls for the multiple authors one. It followed Holland and Calvin, who, through circumstances of Calvin needing a green card or a work visa or whatever, they get married and start rooming together for the sake of him being able to stay in the country because he's such a great musician, and you know the rest. And love happens. It had some cute moments in it that kind of reminded me of when you and I first moved in together. But the awkwardness, yeah. So that was probably a little more personal enjoyment that I got out of the story from that. Otherwise,
is this the one where she was stalking him?
Yeah, she had been stalking him for like 6 months before
my God, that's
she
so
even
cringy.
spoke to him. Yeah, he was a street musician, and she knew all of his stops every day of the week or where he would be at.
That's so creepy.
But of course, that was actually part of the conflict too.
Oh, was it?
As her best friend exposes her.
Oh, good.
Exposes her to him for
creepy she's being.
Well, it was more her friend was just stirring shit. But,
Gotcha. All right, I'm gonna dive into the physics books.
Yeah, do it.
And I'm gonna be real. I read all of these in like the space of like 5 days, so they really blend together a lot for me. But the first one I read was The 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli. And this was a very short, brief introduction. And it was the first one that really piqued my interest. And I needed more information on some of these concepts. So yes, that's that. I mean, honestly, they all sort of blend together, but I just know that that was the first, and it was intriguing.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I recommend it for anyone who doesn't know anything about physics, like me, apparently.
Okay, the next thing I read in April was A Sorceress of Her Own, which is book 1 of the Gifted Ones, and this is by Diane Duvall. This was a medieval romance here, and this is a story about a very brutal earl who is pretty much the best knight in all of the land and is known for his ferocity and everything.
And his sword.
And his sword, absolutely. But deep down, all he wants is a good woman and to give him heirs, right?
Yeah.
But he just with his reputation, of course, of being so brutal and just intense and everything, women are either afraid of him or don't realize that he has a soft heart underneath.
Oh, gosh.
You know.
Underneath all that armor,
right?
Like plate armor.
Right, exactly.
That shining
yes,
armor.
Yes.
That's
Anyway,
delightful.
thank you. I'm glad you're so into my synopsis.
I'm here for you. Yes.
Well, anyway, the only female he seems to enjoy the company of is the wise woman that has served his family since his grandfather was lord of the lands or whatever.
Oh man.
But little does he know that it is not an actual immortal woman, but an actual line of women of the same family that pretend to be the same wise woman. And yes, so really, it's a young maid underneath those robes, only pretending to be an old woman.
So she can still be a virgin for him.
She absolutely was.
Yeah, I told you.
That's definitely a theme.
Yeah.
In a lot of these romances. They're really good at sex afterwards, though. Like
Oh my
it's
gosh.
like it just comes naturally to them.
Yep.
Like they know how to bang. All right, and so that was that was A Sorceress of His Own.
Do you recommend it? Is it a series?
Well, there's 2 of them, and I do recommend it. Yeah, I do. I've actually considered going back and redoing
Nice.
this one and its sequel, which are the only ones written in that version of the world or whatever that Diane Duvall created with these immortals.
Oh, did she play with the universe with another series?
Right, yeah, she's got another series that deals with these same types of gifted characters, but it's not the Gifted Ones series. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I made it really silly. Your wrap up there.
Oh,
I
that's
just
okay.
threw all my sillies on there.
That's all right. That's fine. I read a lot of silly this month.
You did. I'm glad you realized that. No, I'm just kidding.
So, where are you at in Cut and Run right now when you're rereading?
I had to pause that, actually. Because of all of these physics books that I got into.
Well, yes. Congratulations. You're very brilliant, dear.
I'm back to, I'm actually currently rereading Kings of the Wild.
That's the okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you were telling me about.
I read Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he narrated this himself. And this was one of my least favorites, honestly. I found it very inaccessible. And I'm not sure how much of it was narration, how much of it was because it was written that way. I didn't get a lot out of this one.
That's too bad.
Yeah, I definitely recommend 7 Brief Lessons on Physics over Astrophysics for People in a Hurry.
Cool. So the next thing I read was the follow-up to A Sorceress of His Own, which is Rendezvous with Yesterday, which this follows Lord Robert, which is the Earl's brother from the first book, and he stumbles across a woman from the future that lands just in his in his forest of his lands that he's lord over.
I remember you telling me about this.
Yes. So this one was a lot of fun because the lady was a quick talking Texan that don't put up with nothing from no one and tells these medieval men to shut up and slaps their hand when they try and touch her stuff and things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Good
It was
for her.
yeah, good for her. It was a lot of fun.
That one seemed way more intriguing to me.
Hmm. You'd probably enjoy that one more.
All right, the next one I read was Brief Answers to the Big Questions by Stephen Hawking, and this is the first of 2 Stephen Hawking books I read this month, and his stuff was the most accessible, and I loved both of his books, and it really not only made me love the idea of physics and theoretical physics and quantum physics, and I was learning a lot, but also made me appreciate Stephen Hawking more, just like as a person, you know, because he's sprinkling little bits of his life. And actually I think it was the second one that I read was published after he had passed.
Okay.
So it was finished by someone else, but yeah, I loved it. Highly recommend.
Great. The last thing I read in April was Blackwater by Tara Brown. This is number 1 in the Redeemers series that she has, but it is number 7 in the Devil's Roses series that she has. So I kind of jumped in the middle there, but this is apparently a whole fresh cast of characters. This was one I usually wouldn't go for. It had witches in it, which I'm mostly okay with, but there were vampires and shapeshifters and stuff in there too, which
You could take or leave.
yeah,
It's a little overdone.
You can usually leave that, you know. But I guess I like the main character enough. Even though, like, Antebellum South, like, that whole, like, or I guess not Antebellum, no, it would be Cajun, the whole Cajun, you know,
Yeah?
Louisiana thing
That's
is...
not your jam?
Not my jam, but I was able to put up with it enough here, I guess.
Oh, man.
Something I realized in this one, though, this was, like, the 4th in the romance books I read in April that had an either Scottish or Irish accented
Narrator?
male love interest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Were the, so you did most of these on audiobook.
Yes, yeah.
Were the voice actors convincing in their accents?
Yes, they were, and that's something I wanted to talk about with Roomies, too. The narrator, she obviously had an Irish accent, a natural Irish accent, and so that worked very well for Calvin, the main character. But it was just great when it would slip out a bit when she was doing Holland, who's supposed to just be an American, you know, white girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it more cute than pulling me out of the story because, you know,
Nice.
who doesn't like an accent, right?
That's true. Okay, the last thing I read, you finished,
I
right?
finished, yeah.
Okay, last thing I read this month is The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking and Leonard McLeodenow. So Leonard McLeodenow pieced together this with the help of Stephen Hawking's family. This is a bunch of his work that was compiled after his death. But he had been working on this book for a while. And he didn't dumb things down too much, but was like encouraging, like, come on, you can do this. You can wrap your mind around these really intense, you know, theoretical physics and stuff, and just trying to inspire awe, right? And I very much enjoyed it.
Awesome. I think that's really great, the amount of like science
Yeah.
that you read this month.
And that was the end of our April wrap up.
Yes. So go ahead and let us know what you think. Let us know what you read in April. Subscribe to the channel, give us a comment, and we'll see you later, everyone.
Bye.